Please, Dr. Moazam.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. And if it's okay with Dr. Barusa and Dr. Barreland, is it okay if I talk from here? Okay, thank you. So it's an honor for me to be here giving a talk in this workshop. And I would like to really thank the organizing committee and the Pontifical Academy of Sciences for providing me the opportunity to be here today. So the title I've chosen for my talk is Ethics in Personalized Medicine Through a Different Prism. So just up front to let you know, I'm neither a philosopher, nor am I a molecular biologist, nor am I a geneticist. My prism is that of a run-of-the-mill clinician. You want it higher?
It's better. You must hold
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So the prism that I will use today, therefore, is really that of a run-of-the-mill, usual, ordinary physician who, after training and practicing in the United States, has worked in Pakistan, and that's where I am still, for many years, both in the private and the public government healthcare systems in the country. So Dr. Dickinson has very elegantly covered some of the areas, made my life a little bit easier. But on the other hand, what I'm going to present today, and I'm not going to use text slides, so you have to pay attention to me. So it all depends. It's a matter of one's vantage point. And you can have many people looking at the same thing, and you can see different things. Now, I'm sure many of you have seen this very striking photograph. So how the planet, where we live, would look if we stood on the moon and looked at it. So it's the same world, but the picture illustrates another way of perceiving the world, using a different perspective. And that is what I'm going to try to do in my talk today. And that's my perspective. So a little bit about Pakistan. So Pakistan is a South Asian country with a population of 208 million people. It's classified as a low middle income country. And to those of you who may not be familiar with it, that means, so it has a GDP per annum, per capita income, which is around US dollars, 1,600. Now, if you put that in perspective, the last I looked at it, for the USA, this number is 65,000. For the UK, it is 40,000, sorry, and for Italy, it's around 36 US dollars, $36,000 a year. So in Pakistan, government medical colleges that provide education, which is subsidized education, and public hospitals that provide minimum cost health care, both of these are being rapidly replaced by private colleges and private hospitals. The country does not have a national health insurance scheme of any kind. So now if you look at it, of the total, we have 7.7 billion people who live on the planet today. And 2/3 of them live in either middle-income countries like Pakistan, or they live in low-income countries. So that's 2/3 of the population of this world. So I think that what I will share with you today about my views, my impressions about personalized medicine, will resonate with those who live, the 2/3 of the population of this world. Now, I say this very acutely aware of the fact that in this room, I am the only person from the part of the world that's called the developing world. It's an awful term, but for want of a better term, better word, I'm using it. So I'm very aware of that fact. So it's a challenge, an honor too, I guess. So my experiences in Pakistan in collaboration with colleagues within the region confirms that there is an increasingly porous national borders when it comes to medical science, biotechnological advances, and human subject research. So for understandable reasons, the movement of what we have come to term scientific progress is largely in a north to south or west to east direction. So many of the scientific advances transplanted, and I use that word advisedly, transplanted into developing countries have benefited citizens of that region. There's no question of that. However, many also raise and accentuate ethical challenges in clinical practice and human subject research that are specific to local context within which these play out. So by these, what do I mean by local context? By these, I mean socioeconomic realities, poor access to healthcare, cultural and religious values that essentially shape gender relationships and that define how you understand illness and death in life. And it also influences the local context are the different norms of public and healthcare professional interactions and relationships. And these contexts are often very different from the countries currently at the forefront of modern science and a lot of what we've been hearing since yesterday. So in my opinion, it is these contextual factors which also heighten many of the ethical issues that we've been talking about within countries like Pakistan, where I am right now. So what I'm going to do is essentially talk very briefly of 3 points. So the first part of my talk is I will share with you very briefly what, in my opinion, informs the move towards PM, towards personalized medicine. And in this, I will be repeating and talking of some of the things that we've been covering already. The second part of my talk will be specific to how the personalized medicine is likely to influence clinical practice within the context of developing countries. The third part, I'll say a few things about the implications if there is a shift primarily towards genetic-based research, and I will then conclude. So the philosophy behind personalized medicine, in my opinion, reflects a view that the individual is the primary social and moral unit with the freedom to make his or her own decisions. This, if you look at it, is not necessarily the view of human beings and life that are shared by societies that are shaped by very different histories, different kinship systems, and views of life in which sometimes duties to others, including your family members, overrides the right of the individual. So the focus of personalized medicine, it's grounded in secular, as we've talked about it already. It's grounded in my opinion, the secular Anglo-American philosophical traditions. And it's epitomized in the United States. It talks about empowering individuals and protecting rights. And I'm not saying that's not important. This is how I see it. Echoes of this, and some of this, again, Dr. Dickinson pointed out to it, echoes of this kind of this philosophy appears in the language that is employed for personalized medicine. So the aim is, quote, to use a person's clinical, genetic, genomic, environmental information to tailor a treatment plan that will maximize efficiency and safety for that individual. So this, of course, as has already been said, this move received a major boost in 2015 by President Obama, Barack Obama, who again, who at that time spoke of initially a new precision medicine initiative. Now, the National Institute of Health describes PM, and if you go to the website, you can find this, as, quote, a more individualized molecular approach that will enrich and modify medicine. The long term is, quote, to generate knowledge applicable to the whole range of health and disease. And the website pertaining to the All of Us research program, with funding that runs in the millions, expresses the key aim as, quote, to gather data over many years from 1 million or more people living in the United States in order to develop individualized care. And in 2016, the Hastings Center report very prominently featured this aspect and this program. And there was a lead article in it which was called, which was titled, The Precision Medicine Nation. So now this is happening at a time when an increasingly unequal world is fracturing along lines of race and gender, ethnicity and place of origin, educational levels and socioeconomic status, the haves and the have-nots. It's a time when we are building walls and fences. So this fragmentation is not true just between different countries. It also exists within the borders of a country, be this Pakistan or the United States. So Pakistan, it's an impoverished country, but it has pockets of very rich first worlders living in it. And the affluent United States holds within it large enclaves of citizens who are akin to third world dwellers. So deciding who qualifies as the us in the all of us, and who and how many will benefit from quite an expensive, the expensive fruits of personalized medicine, I think is an ethical question that needs to be raised. Equally important is how these choices will be made and by whom. So health is universally accepted as a public good. The United Nations lists good health and well-being of global populations among its targets for the Sustainable Development Goods, the program for 2030. Now, if you look at it, the 10 years left to achieve this rather optimistic goal that the UN has set coincides at the time in which we are seeing a push for personalized medicine. So Joyner and Penneth, for example, and of course there have been people, and there's been an honest discussion about the aims, etc. So there are many who question whether the personalized medicine's promise of improving risk predictions, health outcomes, lower treatment costs, contributions to public health are really realistic. Others have called it premature, the promises, etc., and I happen to be one of them. So now let me turn to the second part of my talk, and this is how I see physicians who are in countries like Pakistan, what they are likely to face should personalized medicine become the accepted standard of care in clinical practice. And I'll just touch on 3 issues based on my own experience. So, tailoring the most effective therapy for patients through attention to individual variations and relevant social factors, that's not a new concept for physicians. So old-fashioned physicians like I am, that I consider myself to be, consider this patient-centered medicine. So not personalized medicine, but patient-centered medicine. So the increasing reliance, however, on genetic testing, biomarker screening, pharmacogenetics will radically affect clinical practice everywhere, but this will especially be the case in developing countries. So we are experiencing a very rapid expansion in the private sector in healthcare services, including secondary, tertiary care. Private clinics and hospitals are now offering tests and treatment which is not available in the public sector, to which the majority of our public turns to. And these services are technology and market driven. They're on a fee-for-service basis. They are expensive, and most of these institutions and clinics are unregulated. So I'll give you an example. A few private institutions in Pakistan are now offering genetic screening and targeted therapy for breast cancer. So if you will recall the income per annum, the GPD, it was $1,600 in Pakistan. The cost of one genetic test for breast cancer ranges between US dollars 160 to over $200. The cost of one vial of Herceptin for the treatment of estrogen receptor positive breast cancer is around $900. Now, the full course for early breast cancer for just 1 year requires Herceptin injections, which have to be administered every 3 months. I have a colleague in one of the busiest cancer hospitals in Pakistan, and she was telling me they'd conducted a 1-year survey of the patients they saw with breast cancer. And she said that in that survey, what they realized was that only 1% of the suitable patients could receive Herceptin due to the prohibitive course. 1% of the women who presented there with breast cancer. Some of you may be aware of the European Commission, led by the GENTI. They set out a report on the status of genetic testing in countries with emerging economies. And this reveals that there is an absence of universal health cover for genetic tests, screenings, etc., in most of these countries. These tests, therefore, involve out-of-pocket expenses, which are essentially out of reach for the majority of the people. So should genetic testing and pharmacogenetic drugs become the new norm in clinical practice, the accepted standard of care, this will mean inaccessibility of healthcare for an increasing number of patients. More than that, it will also further strengthen the existing discriminatory practices in clinical medicine, in your countries and in mine. So, within affluent countries, for example, for this kind of treatment, etc., or the testing, you would need appropriate health insurance. If you don't have it, then that's too bad. The second point I want to touch on is something that came up on discussions over tea, but we have not talked about it, and that is genetic literacy. So this is going to be a very important area, and I don't think it has received a great deal of attention. So the complex, specialized nature of personalized medicine requires genetic literacy among healthcare professionals who are working in the front lines of clinical care. And this is not currently the part of the curriculum for medical colleges or for postgraduate training. I was talking briefly to Dr. Finns about it, and the situation is not maybe a little bit better in the United States, but there is no formal teaching of this. So the GEN-T report that I referred to reveals that for the developing countries, essentially, most physicians are unable to recognize the genetic basis of diseases and the need for genetic referral and counseling of patients. Well, even if there was one among them who picked something up and wanted to refer it for counseling, the problem is that within these countries, the current number of certified genetic counselors ranges from 0.06 per million population to, I guess it goes, there's one or two countries that had 0.2 per million population. And this is, you compare this to the recommended numbers, which should be 3 to 5 of such people per million. So, of course, in litigious countries, like the US, unless something is done about it, I suspect that personalized medicine is also likely to increase the legal liability for practicing physicians who lack appropriate knowledge. So the third thing about clinical medicine that I'm going to raise, it's going to be, I think, it has been discussed, will be raised again, I think, later today. That's the issue of privacy and confidentiality. In medicine, this has always been a very difficult, critical area. It's not easy to do. So, but maintaining privacy and confidentiality of genetic information of patients will introduce novel difficulties. We're talking about that already for physicians and hospitals. Now, if you look at the social context of countries like Pakistan, these difficulties will be accentuated there because the countries are consist of socio-economically interdependent, family-centered societies. And in these societies, often under the same roof, there may be 3 to 4 generations that are living together. Healthcare decisions, because they're economically dependent on each other, are taken collectively. They are not taken on an individual basis. Moreover, within hierarchical, patriarchal family structures, genetic information, inadequately understood and explained by physicians, poorly understood by patients and their families, is likely to have repercussions for the weakest, most vulnerable members of the family unit. And women in particular run serious risks of stigma and discrimination based on genetic findings. Okay, let me turn to the third part of my talk, which is essentially to look a little bit on some of the research issues within the context of the part of the world in which I live. So prioritizing a personalized medicine approach to healthcare requires, we know that, we've talked about it, requires the development of large genetic profile repositories. We need big data for this. The role of the pharmaceutical industry will be central to pharmacogenetic research and the production of targeted drugs. The growing enthusiasm for genetic-based research is attested to a recent publication by Baer and Gallia, in which they report that in 2014, USA funding for research proposals that included, quote, the word gene, genome, genetic, was 50% greater than those with the word prevention. So what are the issues for our part of the world? The last 4 decades have seen a steady increase in outsourcing of human subject research to developing countries. So in multinational research collaborations involve Western academic centers and the pharmaceutical industry who fund research for which developing countries serve as hosts for clinical trials, for data collection, etc. Certain forms of collaborative genetic research is already being conducted in the developing part of the world, even in Pakistan. And in these research collaborations, blood, tissue samples, etc., are being analyzed and they're being stored outside the host countries that do not have the capability to do so. So there was it's a very good article based on qualitative research by Zainab Sheikh, who's from Pakistan, now in Denmark, and Klaus Hoyer, who's from Denmark. So they compared responses of genetic research participants from rural Pakistan and from subjects from Denmark. So they found very striking differences between the two groups in the area of knowledge and understanding of genetics, expectations of subjects from the researchers and the research, and the different understanding of the term trust, which is central to ethical research. So in the Pakistani group, there was a strong element of what is called therapeutic misconception when these people were approached by physicians, by researchers. So there's a dearth of sociological studies in everything we do in medicine. So we're into hard data, quantifiable stuff, algorithms, but I think these studies are also important. They're important because we need to look at the ways in which existing socioeconomic realities, lack of access to healthcare, and cultural and religious values complicate conducting what we call ethical research. And this will be especially true for genetic research. So, and I really think it is rather simplistic to believe that all this can be accomplished by applying the culturally myopic Georgetown mantra, the 4 principles, where the veto power is with autonomy. It just doesn't work. It's not understood that way. So developing new drugs is both expensive and time-consuming for the pharma industry. And moving into the genetic area is going to be even more expensive. So within advanced affluent countries, the industry is facing increasing stringent regulations and a relatively informed public, which is very aware of related risks and also potential discriminations based on genetic profiles. In contrast, developing countries offer large, poor, illiterate, treatment-naive populations with little or no access to healthcare. Ethical oversight at institutional and national levels is very lax. Governments are very eager to bring in collaborative research because that brings money into the country. So these countries allow cheaper, faster research, and this has been proven through the clinical drug trials. And it would seem to me that this would be a natural progression when it comes to genetic research and data collection. Anyway, when am I supposed to finish? Now, okay. So I will not say much about, because it's been said already, is about the genetic versus conventional research and the fact that we have enough conventional research that has told us through the years, and we certainly, physicians who practice medicine in the trenches, know that when it comes to health, humans are more than a sum of their molecules. And that there is evidence that what we should be looking at is that disease is modulated through multi-factorial social dimensions. So I will take just 1 minute more, okay? So in this area, the fact that it's not high-end technological interventions that lie at the basis of improving health was brought home to me at a very personal level when I first returned to Karachi. And I'm a pediatric surgeon. And I successfully repaired a very complicated tracheoesophageal fistula in a 1-week-old baby. And this was done in a state-of-the-art hospital, tertiary hospital. This child died 8 months later from infectious diarrhea he contracted because the village in which he and his family lived did not have access to clean drinking water. And this was not the only instance I was to encounter in my years of practice. Okay, so what I'm going to do, as we're running out of time, is, this is my second last slide. Some of you are familiar with this. This is a very popular slide we show to our medical students. They recognize the helix, of course, but they have trouble figuring out what the rest of it is. What I'm saying is, I think instead of 2 cars, we need to be in the same car. So, and this is my last slide. Now, in the very first talk yesterday, Dr. Hood had a slide of a cartoon about an elephant in a dark room. In my opinion, Dr. Hood, you didn't do full justice to what that metaphor is. It's actually a very beautiful poem, and this poem is known to Muslims. It was written by Jalaluddin Rumi. He was a Sufi, and he was a Sufi from the 13th century. And this is a translation from his original poem, which was in Persian, into English by Coleman Barks. So Rumi was not talking about personalized medicine. He was talking about spiritual matters, about knowledge, about life, about God. But in my opinion, this poem is relevant as a metaphor for the collective wisdom that we need to understand personalized medicine, which goes beyond scientific knowledge and discussions. So, if you allow me, let me read this. So, Rumi talks about an elephant in the dark. So he says, no one here, remember the elephant here is personalized medicine, in my opinion. No one here has ever seen an elephant. We bring it at night to a dark room. One by one, we go in the dark, and we come out saying how we experience the animal. One of us happens to touch the trunk, a water pipe kind of creature. Another touches the ear, a very strong, always moving back and forth fan animal. Another touches the leg. I find it still like a column on a temple. Another touches the tusk, a rounded sword made of porcelain. Each of us touches one place and understands the whole in that way. If each of us held a candle there, and if we went in together, we could see it. So I'm going to end here. I think perhaps this is a little bit of what we're trying to do yesterday and today. So thank you very much.